Hello, brave souls, and welcome to Midnight Memoirs. This is where untold horrors and ghostly echoes meet, pulling you slowly into restless nights wrapped in shadows. Before tonight's story begins, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you're called by these dark, mysterious nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a tale when midnight strikes. Now, turn off the lights, stay very still, and let's disappear into the darkness together. She was still just a teenager when this first story happened. She had been asked to babysit for a family she knew. Nothing unusual, nothing that felt dangerous or strange at the time. Babysitting was common, and she needed the money. Around the same period, her own family was going through something incredibly stressful. Her sister had just given birth, but the baby was very sick. Everyone was on edge, constantly worried, waiting for phone calls from the hospital, bracing themselves for bad news. That night, while babysitting, she was trying to keep herself busy. The house was quiet. The child she was watching was asleep, and there was nothing for her to do except tidy up a little. She stood in the kitchen washing dishes, letting her mind wander. Her thoughts kept drifting back to her sister and the baby, wondering how they were doing, whether things had improved, whether she would hear something soon. As she placed one of the freshly washed cups up on the shelf, something happened that stopped her cold. Without warning, one of the cups suddenly flew off the shelf. It didn't tip or slide, it flew, landing in the middle of the kitchen floor and smashing loudly into pieces. She froze. Her heart dropped instantly. There was no breeze, no vibration, nothing that could explain it. She knew immediately, deep in her gut, that something was wrong. It wasn't fear exactly, more like certainty. A heavy, sinking feeling. Her first thought was her sister's baby. She didn't hesitate. She wiped her hands, picked up the phone, and called the hospital right away. Her voice shook as she asked how her sister and the baby were doing. To her complete confusion, she was told that everything was fine. The baby was stable. There had been no change, no bad news. Relieved but deeply unsettled, she hung up. She tried to rationalize what had just happened. Accidents happen, cups fall, but it didn't feel like that. The feeling stayed with her the entire night. It wasn't until later that she learned the truth. While she was standing in that kitchen, while that cup shattered on the floor, the child she had been babysitting had died quietly in their sleep. No warning, no sound, just gone. The realization haunted her. The timing was too exact to ignore. She became convinced that somehow, whatever force caused that cup to fall had been trying to tell her something. A warning, a signal, or maybe just a moment where something crossed a line between worlds. As for me, my own experiences began early, though for a long time I didn't question them. When I was younger, I always felt like I was being followed, not in a threatening way. It felt comforting, protective even, like someone was watching over me, staying close, making sure nothing bad happened. I didn't see a clear shape at first. It was more of a presence, a feeling. Sometimes I would sense it behind me, sometimes near my door at night. I remember lying in bed and feeling calm because I wasn't alone, even though logically I knew I was. As I got older, though, that feeling began to change. The presence started to frighten me. I became more aware of it, more conscious of how often it seemed to move around my space. I would hear pacing outside my door at night, slow and deliberate. Sometimes I would wake up and feel like something was standing in the corner of the room, watching. Eventually one night, I couldn't take it anymore. I was scared, truly scared, and I spoke out loud. I told it that I was afraid. I told it to go away. After that, I never saw it again, but I don't believe it left completely. I think it's still around, just out of sight, still protecting me, still close enough to matter, but no longer making itself known. I also believe it might be the reason I don't see things the way others in my family do. Almost like something is deliberately blocking my vision, keeping certain things hidden from me. There are moments when I feel like it's doing its job a little too well. I also have this strange, ongoing thing with my keys. To be fair, I've always been a bit forgetful, but this goes beyond that. I lose my keys constantly, sometimes for days at a time. They disappear completely, only to show up later in places I know I've already checked. The worst incident lasted 2 full weeks. I searched everywhere, every drawer, every bag, every surface. I retraced my steps over and over again. Nothing. Eventually, I got so frustrated that I shouted out loud, half joking but half serious, asking for them back. The next morning, I woke up and walked into the room to find my keys sitting right there on the table in plain sight. I live alone. Unless I somehow got up in my sleep, found them, and placed them there without remembering, which seems extremely unlikely, especially since no one has ever known me to sleepwalk, then I can't explain it. When I lived with my family, no one ever saw anything like that happen, so if it wasn't me, then I don't know who or what it was. One of the most intense experiences I ever had didn't even happen in my own house. It happened at a friend's place, a house she always claimed was haunted. She told me repeatedly that there were 4 spirits living there. I never believed her. I thought she was exaggerating or just enjoying the idea of it. One night her parents were out, and there were about 5 or 6 of us crammed into her bedroom. We were kids, around 11 years old. The lights were low, music was playing, and we were dancing around, laughing, just being stupid kids. Out of nowhere, her dog completely lost it. It started barking and growling like crazy. At the same time, we heard the unmistakable sound of her dad's voice screaming her name from downstairs. We all panicked instantly. Terrified, we ran downstairs as fast as we could. But when we got there, no one was there. The house was empty. The front door hadn't opened. There was no car outside. The only thing that seemed alive in that room was the dog, which was still going absolutely wild, staring and barking at one corner of the living room like something was standing there. We ran out the back door and onto the street, all of us except my friend. I turned back and realized she wasn't with us. As I ran back inside, she came stumbling out, crying hysterically. She told us something had grabbed her and said her name. She stayed at my house the rest of the night. That wasn't the only strange thing to happen in the house I lived in around that time. There were many moments that still make my skin crawl. Once, during a sleepover, a group of us were in my bedroom with the lights off, having a pillow fight. We were laughing, shouting, just being kids. Then I heard a gasp. It was sharp and frightened. I looked up, and at the end of my room, I saw the figure of a man wearing what looked like a trench coat. I turned on the light immediately. The figure was gone. But the worst part was that every single person in that room had seen it too. The house also had a massive bathroom. There was a section behind the shower that couldn't be seen when you were sitting on the toilet. Every single person who ever used that bathroom complained about the same thing. They all felt like something was standing behind that shower, watching. The sink and mirror faced the shower, and when you stood there, you could see the reflection behind you. The feeling intensified when you looked into that mirror. It was like being watched from just out of sight. If you ever brought my dog into that bathroom, it got even worse. She would walk straight over to that hidden area, sit down, and stare at it intensely. Sometimes she would growl softly, low and warning, until you left the room. She never did that anywhere else. One of my sister's experiences still terrifies me to think about. She once had a friend over, and she left the room to go to the toilet. As she walked down the hall, she heard what sounded like knocking on the window. The window was on the second level of the house. She went back into the room and asked her friend if she had heard it. Her friend looked terrified and said it happened every time she left the room. They both ran into my room screaming. Another time, when my sister and I shared a bedroom, something happened that made us sleep with the lights on for weeks. The room was long and narrow. My bed was against the wall, but hers wasn't. One night, she couldn't sleep. She kept tossing and turning, opening and closing her eyes. At one point, she opened them and saw the face of a young girl hovering near her. She said the girl looked at her with a loving expression, almost gentle. But when the girl realized my sister was awake and looking at her, she reacted in shock and ran behind the bed. My sister screamed. In the same house, I had my own terrifying experience. The stairs connected directly to the hallway, and the front door was mostly glass, with windows on either side. One day, as I walked down the stairs, I heard the clear sound of high heels walking up to the door. I watched the door the entire time. I heard the knock. Then I heard the footsteps walk away. No one was there. I was too scared to open the door for a long time after that. Even after we moved houses, the strange things didn't stop. They just changed focus. Most of it seemed to center around my little sister. When my mum and sister went away, I often had the house to myself. I could hear sounds coming from my sister's room, footsteps, movement, things shifting. The strangest moment was when I heard her R&B music start playing loudly from her room. It was unmistakable. I went upstairs, following the sound. As I put my hand on the door handle, the music stopped. When I told my sister about it later, she went pale. She told me that something similar had happened to her. She had been listening to music when her phone rang. The moment she answered the call, the music stopped. When she hung up, it started again on its own. A year later, and during a blackout, my mum asked me to grab candles from upstairs. As I climbed the stairs in the dark, I saw a tall, black figure peering out from my sister's room. I turned around immediately. The most recent experience happened not long ago. My sister came to visit me. She was upstairs in my room while I was downstairs. After a few minutes, I heard her calling my name. I ignored it, thinking I'd be back upstairs soon anyway. She eventually came downstairs herself. We started talking, and after a while she told me that she still senses things sometimes. Changes in temperature, the feeling that someone is standing nearby. She then told me that while she was in my room, she felt a man walk in and stand directly in front of her. It scared her so badly that she called for me and then carefully made her way past him and downstairs. As we were sitting there talking, we both heard footsteps on the stairs. I tried to brush it off, blaming the thin walls of the neighboring house. But then the dining room door, which had been locked, slowly opened. We heard a single footstep on the wooden floor. That was enough. My brother's girlfriend has also said she sees a man when she's at my place. I live here mostly alone, and I rarely see anything myself, which almost makes it worse. I feel like I'm the only one not fully aware of what's sharing my space. And this is only the surface of it all. My mum trained as a medium years ago, and she has countless stories. My brother has seen things too, things I can barely bring myself to describe, like a man hanging in his bedroom. Sometimes it feels like whatever this is, it runs in our family. Whatever line exists between worlds seems thinner for us, and whether I see it or not, I know it's there. This will probably get buried, but it's one of those experiences that never really leaves you, no matter how much time passes. Even now, when I think back on it, I still get that uneasy feeling in my stomach, the kind that tells you something wasn't right long before you fully understood why. At the time, I was living with my then girlfriend. It wasn't a perfect situation, but we were trying to make things work. Part of that arrangement meant her little brother was around a lot. He was about 7 years old back then, small for his age, quiet most of the time, and strangely intense in a way that made adults uneasy without being able to explain exactly why. The reason he stayed with us so often was his mother. She was deeply unstable, addicted to pills, and completely unreliable. There were days she wouldn't even wake up to pick him up from the bus stop. Sometimes he would be left standing there alone until someone else noticed. Eventually it became easier and safer for him to stay with us. At least in our house he was fed, supervised, and had some kind of routine. At first, nothing seemed particularly wrong. He was quiet but polite. He didn't cause trouble, didn't act out in obvious ways. He mostly kept to himself, playing with toys or watching TV. Still, there was something about him that unsettled me. I couldn't put my finger on it. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a sense that he was always watching, always listening, like he was tuned into something the rest of us weren't. After he'd been staying with us for a while, things started to change. One day, we noticed that he had soiled himself. At first, we thought it was an accident. He was young, and given his home life, it didn't seem impossible that he might have some behavioral issues. We handled it gently. We talked to him calmly, explained that he needed to use the toilet, reassured him that he wouldn't be punished for accidents as long as he told us. He seemed to understand. He nodded, listened, and said the right things. For a while, the problem stopped. Things went back to normal, or at least as normal as they ever were. Then one day, while cleaning the house, I found a pair of underwear hidden away, filled with feces. It wasn't an accident left unnoticed. It had been deliberately hidden. That's when I realized this wasn't just a simple issue anymore. I didn't want to scare him or make him feel ashamed, so I approached him gently. I sat him down, spoke calmly, and asked him what had happened. I made sure my tone was kind, reassuring, non-threatening. I wanted him to feel safe telling the truth. He looked at me without much expression and said something I still hear clearly in my head. "The man with the red face made me do it." The words caught me off guard. For a moment I didn't know how to respond. Kids say strange things sometimes. They make up imaginary friends, imaginary monsters, excuses when they're scared of getting in trouble. I told myself that was probably all this was, an excuse, a story. I didn't push him too hard. I nodded, cleaned things up and let it go. But the feeling lingered. The phrase stayed with me longer than it should have. The man with the red face. It didn't sound playful or imaginative. It sounded matter-of-fact, like he was describing someone real. A few days later, something happened that made it impossible to brush off. I was cleaning the bedroom, doing the usual things, when I decided to move the bed slightly. As I bent down and looked underneath, my stomach dropped. There were 2 large butcher knives under my bed. Only one of them belonged to us. The other one I had never seen before in my life. These weren't small kitchen knives. They were big, heavy, serious blades. Seeing them there, hidden carefully beneath the place where I slept, sent a rush of fear through me that I can still remember vividly. My heart started pounding, and my mind raced through possibilities I didn't want to consider. I picked them up slowly, like they might somehow react to being touched. My hands were shaking. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that this was a child, on that there had to be some explanation. I called him over. Again, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him. I simply showed him the knives and asked where they came from. He didn't hesitate. He didn't look confused. He didn't look guilty. "The man with the red face made me do it," he said. That same flat tone, that same certainty. At that point, every alarm bell in my head was screaming. Still, I tried to keep myself together. I didn't want to scare him, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I decided to ask more questions, thinking maybe I could figure out what he meant. I asked him why the man with the red face told him to put the knives there. What he said next is something I don't think I'll ever fully forget. Because if the knives are closer, It's easier to cut you." There was no emotion in his voice, no anger, no fear. He said it like he was explaining something obvious, something practical, like he was repeating instructions he had been given. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The room felt different, smaller, heavier. I was suddenly very aware of how vulnerable I was, how close those knives had been to me while I slept, completely unaware. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I told him to go play in the other room. I put the knives away somewhere secure, and that night I locked my bedroom door for the first time since living there. From then on, I never slept fully at ease in that house. Every sound made me tense. Every creak or movement in the hallway pulled me out of sleep. I started paying attention to things I had ignored before, like how he would sometimes stare at empty corners of rooms, or how he seemed to know when someone was approaching before there was any sound. I don't know what he meant by the man with the red face. I don't know if it was trauma, imagination, something psychological, or something else entirely. I don't know if it was something he saw, something he believed, or something he was using to make sense of thoughts he didn't understand. All I know is that whatever was going on with him, it wasn't normal, and it wasn't harmless. Eventually, circumstances changed. He stopped staying with us as much. Life moved on in its usual messy, complicated way, but that experience never really faded for me. It lodged itself deep in my memory, a reminder that sometimes the most unsettling things don't come with warning signs or dramatic moments. Sometimes they come quietly through a child's voice, spoken with calm certainty. Even now, years later, I still think about it. I still wonder what that kid was dealing with, what he saw or believed he saw, and what might have happened if things had gone just a little differently. Some stories don't end with clear answers. They just sit with you unresolved, reminding you that there are things in this world we don't fully understand, and that sometimes the most disturbing moments are the ones that happen quietly, behind closed doors, while everyone else is asleep. In the mid-1970s, my aunt was living in Louisiana as a young woman, trying to navigate a complicated and uncertain chapter of her life. She and her husband were separated at the time, and she was living on her own for the first time in years. It was a period filled with independence, loneliness, and quiet determination. She worked during the day, kept to herself, and focused on building a sense of stability while everything else felt unsettled. She lived in what was known as a shotgun-style house, common in that part of the South. The home was long and narrow, with rooms lined up one after the other in a straight line. From the front door, you could see all the way through the living room, into the small galley kitchen, and finally into the laundry room at the back. Her house was one of many identical ones, all lined up side by side like a row of dominoes, sharing walls with neighbors on both sides. On one side of her lived a young, single woman around her own age. They exchanged polite greetings, but were not close. They barely knew each other beyond a wave or a brief hello. On the other side lived an elderly couple who had taken a special interest in my aunt. They watched over her as if she were their own daughter. The husband was retired military, stern but kind, and everyone in the neighborhood affectionately called him General. He had a commanding presence, but his concern for my aunt was genuine and protective. One evening after work, my aunt decided to stop by the gym before heading home. It was already late by the time she finished. The streets were quiet, and the air was heavy with the thick Louisiana darkness that settles in after sunset. Street lights were few and far between, and shadows stretched long across the pavement. When she pulled up to her house and stepped inside, she didn't bother turning on any lights. This was her routine. She was tired, sore from the gym, and eager to get out of her work clothes. She walked straight through the living room, past the darkened kitchen, and into the laundry room at the back of the house. As she reached the washer, she began stripping off her work clothes, dropping them inside without much thought. But even as she did this, an uneasy thought crept into her mind. She realized she had forgotten to lock the front door behind her when she came in. She immediately scolded herself silently. She thought about how careless that was, how foolish it felt to leave the door unlocked in the middle of the night, especially while living alone. The thought kept repeating in her head as she finished with the laundry. She stopped briefly in the kitchen before heading back to the living room. She glanced toward the counter where she kept a butcher knife, always stored in its sheath. She didn't take it out, but she made sure it was there, reassuring herself that she wasn't completely defenseless if something went wrong. She then walked back through the dark living room toward the front door, intending to lock it. As she crossed the floor, she suddenly stubbed her toe hard on something. The pain shot up her leg, sharp and surprising. She froze for a moment, confused. She was certain that whatever she had hit had not been there earlier. It wasn't furniture, and it wasn't anything she would normally leave in the middle of the floor. The living room was small and uncluttered. There was no reason for anything to be there. She ignored the confusion for the moment, locked the front door quickly, and finally flipped on the light. What she saw made her stomach drop. Sitting squarely in the middle of the living room floor was a mason jar filled with a dark black liquid. It looked thick and unnatural. It didn't belong to her. She didn't recognize it, and she knew for certain she had not left it there. Her heart started pounding. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar and unsafe. She stood there staring at the jar, trying to understand how it could have appeared there without her noticing. The elderly couple next door often canned their own fruits and vegetables, or so her first instinct was to wonder if they had left it for her. Still shaken, she went next door and called out to the general. When he came to the door, she asked if they had brought her any canned goods. He said no immediately. His expression changed when she described the jar. He looked concerned and serious, far more than she expected. He told her not to open it under any circumstances. He advised her to throw it away and be careful. Trusting his judgment, she took the jar outside and disposed of it without opening it. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, that maybe someone had made a mistake, or that she was overreacting. Exhausted and still unsettled, she went back inside, locked the door again, and went to bed. She didn't sleep well that night, but nothing else seemed to happen. The house remained quiet. Early the next morning, she was awakened by noise outside. There were voices, engines, and an unusual amount of movement. She got out of bed and looked through her window. The street was swarming with police. Patrol cars lined the road. Officers were everywhere, talking, taking notes, and blocking off areas. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Not long after, there was a knock at her door. When she opened it, officers asked her questions about the previous night. That was when she learned what had happened. In the middle of the night, her young neighbor, the woman she barely knew, had been murdered. Her body had been dragged across the road and hung in a tree. The crime scene bore the markings of a serial killer who had been terrorizing the area for some time. There was only one thing different. The killer was known for leaving a calling card at every scene. He always left behind a mason jar filled with rancid fruit. Suddenly, everything made sense. Investigators later pieced together what they believed had happened. The man had followed my aunt home that night. Somewhere between the moment she entered her house and the few minutes it took her to walk back through the living room to lock the door, he had been inside her home. He had carried the mason jar with him, intending to leave it behind as he always did. But something stopped him. To this day, no one knows what frightened him away. It could have been a sound, a movement, a feeling, or something unseen. Whatever it was, it caused him to flee her house within minutes of entering it. Instead, he went next door. Her neighbor did not survive. The killer was eventually caught weeks later, but that knowledge never brought comfort. My aunt was left with the unbearable truth that she had been only moments away from the same fate. A small, unexplained interruption had saved her life. From that day on, my aunt was never careless again. She locked doors immediately. She stayed alert. She trusted her instincts. The memory of that mason jar sitting silently in the middle of her living room never left her. My mother once told me a story about something that happened when I was very young. So young that I have absolutely no memory of it myself. According to her, I wasn't even 4 years old at the time. She said I became seriously ill in a way that no one could explain. She claimed that my health declined rapidly. My hair started falling out in patches and my teeth began turning black. She took me to doctor after doctor, but none of them could give her a clear diagnosis. They ran tests, tried treatments and offered theories, but nothing seemed to fit. According to her, no one could tell her what was wrong with me or why my body was reacting the way it was. Around that same period, she said my behavior started to change. She told me that I began going into trances. I would become still and distant, staring at things that weren't there, or at least weren't visible to anyone else. She said I started talking about shadow people, figures that I apparently claimed to see moving around the house. I didn't describe them as monsters or anything dramatic, just shapes and presences that seemed to exist alongside us. One day, according to my mum, I came tottering down the hallway toward her as fast as my small legs could carry me. She said I looked frightened and urgent. She knelt down and asked me what was wrong. I looked at her and said, "You mean you can't see him?" That immediately alarmed her. She asked me who I was talking about, and I told her there was a very tall man standing in the room with us. I said he was wearing white and that he was standing about 5 feet away. I didn't seem panicked, just matter of fact, as if I were pointing out a piece of furniture she'd somehow missed. Then I told her something else that bothered her deeply. I said that the man in white had told me a secret, but that I wasn't allowed to tell anyone what it was. At that point, my mother was terrified. Rather than dismissing it as a child's imagination, she leaned into her beliefs and sought out help in a way that made sense to her at the time. She took me to see a psychic. According to my mother, the psychic told her that I was a very old soul. She said that because my physical health was so poor, I was somehow able to penetrate a veil between the living and the dead. The psychic claimed that spirits on the other side were trying to call me back, and that the man in white I described might have been the angel of death himself. She told my mum that this was why I was seeing shadow figures and going into trances. Then, as the story goes, something changed. My health slowly began to improve. My hair stopped falling out. My teeth returned to normal. The strange behavior stopped just as suddenly as it had begun. The trances ended. The shadow people disappeared. According to my mother, once I recovered physically, all of the paranormal experiences simply stopped happening. That's the story she told me. There's just one problem. My grandmother tells a very different version of events. My grandma insists that she saw me nearly every day during that period of my life. She says there was never a time when my hair fell out. She doesn't remember my teeth turning black. In fact, she doesn't remember me being seriously ill at all. According to her, I was a normal toddler with nothing out of the ordinary going on. Of course, I don't remember any of it myself. I have no memory of being sick, no memory of shadow people, no memory of a man in white or secrets whispered to me. None of it exists in my own mind. Because of that, I've always leaned toward a simpler explanation. I chalked it up to my mother being mentally unstable. That may sound harsh, but it isn't something I say lightly. Aside from her stories about paranormal experiences, my family has had many other reasons over the years to question her mental health. Her grip on reality has never been entirely consistent, and she has a long history of exaggeration, misinterpretation, and sometimes outright fabrication. Growing up, she told me countless strange stories. She claimed that shortly after my grandfather died, she saw him walking down the hallway of the house. Another time, she said she walked into my bedroom and saw 3 angels standing around my bed, watching over me. She frequently talked about seeing glowing orbs of light floating around her at night when she was alone. As a kid, I listened but didn't take it seriously. It was just my mum being my mum. The stories were strange, but they didn't scare me. They were background noise in a household where that kind of talk was normal. None of it really fazed me until about a year ago. I had quit my career to attend university full-time and moved back in with my family to save money. About a month after I moved back, my mom started telling me new stories. She said that at night, only after she was already in bed, something strange was happening in her basement suite. She claimed that a spirit was playing with her radio, turning it on and off by itself, switching stations randomly. She said her rocking chair would move back and forth even when no one was sitting in it. She said the blades of the ceiling fan would start spinning even though the fan was turned off. What struck me as odd wasn't just the claims themselves, but her reaction to them. Most people would be terrified if they believed something like that was happening. My mom wasn't. She talked about it like it was a mild inconvenience. The only thing that seemed to genuinely bother her was the radio, because it kept her from falling asleep. I didn't believe any of it. A few other family members and I talked about it and came to the conclusion that my mother might be knowingly making up stories or exaggerating events to get attention. Our arguing with her never led anywhere, and since she didn't seem distressed at the time, I chose to ignore it. Then another month passed. One day, my mom came to me looking genuinely frightened. This was different from her usual tone. She told me that the night before the spirit had become violent. She said it had yanked all the blankets off her bed, grabbed her by the leg, and tried to drag her out of bed. That story stopped me cold. The reason it bothered me so much was because it didn't fit her usual narrative. When she talked about spirits before, she always framed them as good, protective, or meaningful. She often implied that they were drawn to her because she was special in some way. This time, though, she was saying she didn't like it. She wanted it gone. My family is largely Christian, and my mother is what you would call a fundamentalist Christian. So she handled the situation the way she believed the Bible instructed her to. She went around the house blessing it. She prayed. When she said the spirit returned the next night, she commanded it to leave the house in the name of Jesus Christ. According to her, it never came back. For a couple of weeks after that, she didn't mention anything strange at all. The stories stopped and life returned to normal. I assumed the phase had passed. What unsettled me wasn't her story. It was the dog. My mom has an 85-pound mutt named Bo. He's a big, friendly dog, usually fearless and eager to go outside. A few weeks after the last incident, my mom told me that Bo refused to go into the backyard at all. He wouldn't even step outside to use the bathroom. She suggested that whatever had been banished from the house was now lingering in the backyard. I didn't believe that, of course. I assumed Bo was reacting to something ordinary, maybe a smell, maybe an animal, maybe a bad experience I didn't know about. So I went down to my mom's basement suite to see if I could coax him outside. The basement opens onto a large wooden deck. From the deck, a short set of stairs leads down into the backyard. Bo was thrilled to see me, wagging his tail and bouncing around like normal. He seemed completely relaxed. I took him out onto the deck and petted him for a few minutes. He showed no signs of fear. Then I gently led him toward the stairs. That's when everything changed. He stopped dead. He wouldn't put a single paw on the stairs. He edged closer, stretching his neck toward me, his body rigid. I spoke softly to him, trying to reassure him. I petted him, encouraged him, told him he was a good boy. Nothing worked. After several minutes, I managed to get him to step onto the stairs. He froze again. His front paws rested on the last step, his body shaking slightly. I stood in the grass directly in front of him, coaxing him forward. He wouldn't move. No matter what I did, he refused to step into the yard. Eventually, he started whimpering softly, clearly distressed. That's when I began to worry that there might be something tangible scaring him, like a snake or another animal. I searched the backyard thoroughly. I found nothing. This went on for 2 to 3 months. Every time Bo needed to go to the bathroom, my mom had to take him upstairs, out the front door, and into the front yard. He never once stepped foot into the backyard during that time. My mom said she blessed the yard repeatedly, but it didn't make any difference. I still don't know what to think. I don't believe in spirits lurking in the backyard. I don't believe my mother's explanations, but I also can't explain Bo's behavior. He wasn't a nervous dog. He wasn't easily spooked. And he reacted the same way every single time, without fail. That's the part that still bothers me, not my mother's stories. The dog. Because whatever was real and whatever wasn't, Bo acted like there was something out there that he absolutely would not face. And no amount of reassurance, logic, or familiarity could convince him otherwise. And that's the one detail I still can't explain away. I knew a guy once. I'll call him Sam. I knew him mostly in 6th and 7th grade, back when life still felt strange and unfinished, like we were all just figuring out who we were supposed to be. By 7th grade, it wasn't just me and Sam anymore. It was a big group of kids, a loose circle of friends that shifted and changed all the time. We spent our days together at school, after school, hanging out wherever we could. Looking back now, almost everyone from that group ended up with at least one story that still follows them around. This is just one of those stories, but it's the one that never really leaves my mind. By the time 8th grade came around, I wasn't as close to that group anymore. People drifted, found new friends, changed schedules, or just grew apart the way kids do without realizing it. Still, I stayed in touch with 1 or 2 of them, and Sam was one of those people I still knew fairly well. Sam was different. Even back then you could tell. He was a big guy, much bigger than most kids our age, tall and broad, with a kind of raw strength that didn't always know where to go. He had a short temper and a strange energy about him, like he didn't quite fit into the world the way the rest of us did. He wasn't stupid, but he wasn't fully grounded either. He reminded me of Lenny from Of Mice and Men, even at that age. Strong, emotional, easily overwhelmed, and often misunderstood. One day I noticed something was wrong. Sam had marks around his neck. They weren't subtle. They were there, clear enough that you couldn't ignore them once you saw them. When I asked him about it, he told me something that shocked me to my core. He said he had tried to hang himself. I didn't even know how to respond. We were just kids, 8th graders. I barely understood what suicide really meant at that point, let alone that someone my age could seriously attempt it. Sam explained it in a strange, casual way, like he was telling me something that had happened to someone else. He said someone had caught him in the act and cut him down with a machete. A machete. Even now, years later, that detail feels surreal. At the time, I didn't know what to think. I didn't know if he was exaggerating, lying, or telling the truth. Sam had always been a little out there, and sometimes it was hard to separate reality from the stories he told. But the marks on his neck were real, and the look in his eyes wasn't something you could fake easily. Not long after that, Sam disappeared from school. Just gone. No announcement, no explanation. One day he was there, and the next day he wasn't. Kids whispered, rumors spread, but no one really knew what had happened. I did know that he had a girlfriend. She was in our grade too, and I knew her a little, not well, but enough to recognize her in the hallways. Word started spreading that she was pregnant. Pregnant in 8th grade. That alone was shocking enough. Everything about it felt too big, too heavy for kids our age. The real horror of the story, though, didn't come out until later. Sam had been completely overwhelmed by the pregnancy. He was terrified, confused, and emotional. He didn't have the emotional tools to handle something like that. One night, he broke down at the dinner table in front of his entire family. His parents were there. His younger brothers were there. Everyone was sitting around, eating dinner, and Sam started crying. He was panicking. He was saying he didn't know what to do. He was saying his life was over. He was saying he couldn't handle it. And then he said something that should have stopped everything in that room. He said he was going to kill himself. Instead of taking him seriously, his family laughed. They laughed at him, right there at the dinner table. They told him he was being dramatic. They said he wouldn't do it. They dismissed him completely, as if his pain was some kind of joke or inconvenience. Sam got up from the table and went into his bedroom. A few moments later, he came back out holding a gun. He pointed it at his head. He was crying. He was begging them to take him seriously. He said again that he would shoot himself. They laughed again. They told him he wouldn't do it, and then he pulled the trigger. We were just in 8th grade. That fact still hits me every time I think about it. He wasn't a grown man. He wasn't someone who had lived a long, complicated life. He was a kid, a confused, scared, emotionally unstable kid who needed help more than anything else. To this day, knowing what I know now, it's impossible not to wonder about his family. It's impossible not to feel like, on some level, they didn't want him around anymore, that maybe his problems, his emotions, his behavior were too much for them. And instead of helping him, they chose to mock him until it was too late. That thought hurts in a way that never really goes away. For a long time, that's where the story ended in my mind. Sam was gone. His girlfriend was pregnant. Life moved on the way it always does, or even after something horrific. People talked about it for a while, then slowly stopped. New gossip replaced old tragedies. That's how it works, especially when you're young. Then something strange happened recently, because I was thinking about this story again, because it resurfaced in my mind after all these years. I decided to look up the girl. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, maybe, or some need for closure I didn't even realize I was carrying. She has a very unique name, so she was easy to find. I found her Facebook. She looks good, healthy, happy, like someone who survived something terrible and somehow built a life anyway. She looks like she's doing really well. And then I saw her daughter. Her daughter looks happy too, bright, alive, confident. The thing that shocked me the most was how close they look in age. At first glance, they almost look like sisters. The age gap can't be more than 13 or 14 years at most. It's strange seeing that kind of closeness between a mother and daughter, knowing how young the mother must have been when she gave birth. And then I noticed something else. Her daughter looks like Sam. Not a little, a lot. The resemblance is undeniable. The shape of her face, her expression, something in her eyes. It's like a piece of him carried forward into the world, even after everything that happened. Seeing that stirred up a lot of emotions I didn't expect. Sadness, mostly, but also a strange sense of relief. Sam is gone, but something of him remains. A living, breathing person who seems happy, loved and safe. Something Sam never really got to be. It's surreal how life works out sometimes. How one person's story can end so violently and abruptly, while another's continues in ways you'd never predict. How trauma can sit quietly in the past, while new lives grow out of its shadow. For context, this all happened around 20 years ago. a lifetime ago in some ways, and yet the memory still feels sharp. Some stories don't fade, no matter how much time passes. I still think about Sam sometimes, about that kid with the short temper and the big body and the fragile heart. About how different things might have been if someone had taken him seriously, if someone had listened instead of laughing. And I think about how strange it is that it took me this long to see the rest of the story. That his daughter is out there, living her life, carrying pieces of him into a future he never got to see. It's a lot to hold in your head. But once you know it, you don't really get to unknow it. I come from India, and stories like this are not rare where I grew up. Almost everyone I know has at least one acquaintance, neighbor, or distant relative who is said to have been possessed or who experienced something that couldn't be easily explained. These stories are spoken about casually, often over tea or during family gatherings, not always with fear, but with a sense of acceptance that there are things beyond everyday understanding. Personally, I have never seen anything supernatural with my own eyes. I have never witnessed an exorcism directly either. Still, I have many relatives who swear by what they have seen and experienced. These are people I trust, people who are not known for exaggeration or attention-seeking. Because of that, I can't dismiss their stories outright, even though my nature is skeptical. I would describe myself as moderately religious. I believe in my religion and respect it deeply, but I don't follow every ritual or practice strictly. At the same time, my professional background plays a big role in how I see the world. I'm a dentist, trained in science, logic, and evidence-based thinking. I'm used to questioning symptoms, analyzing causes, and looking for rational explanations before jumping to conclusions. Because of this, I tend to approach stories of possession and the supernatural with caution. I don't blindly accept them, but I also don't mock or dismiss them. My father, on the other hand, is very religious. Within our extended family and social circle, he is often the first person people turn to when they are facing serious problems, especially those that seem spiritual in nature. If there is any suspicion of possession or something unnatural happening, he is usually called in to assess the situation. He does not perform exorcisms himself, but he knows people who do and can guide families toward what they believe is the right help. The story I want to share is about my cousin, who is like a sister to me. This is one of the cases that made the strongest impression on me, not because I fully understand it, but because of how dramatic and sudden the changes were. I do not know exactly how or when she became possessed, if possession is indeed what it was. She was studying in a village at the time, away from her immediate family, and many people believe that whatever happened began there. Before all this, she was completely normal. She was educated, sensible, and well-adjusted. Or there was nothing unusual about her behavior. Several relatives witnessed what happened afterward, and because so many people saw it firsthand, I can confidently say that something significant changed in her. Whether one believes this was a supernatural possession or a severe mental health episode is up to the individual. I am simply recounting what happened as honestly as I can. According to the beliefs common in our culture, possessions are usually attributed to jinn. Jinn are believed to be beings that exist alongside humans, but in a different dimension. We cannot see them, but they can see us. They are said to live lives similar to ours. They eat, drink, marry, have families, follow religions, and speak different languages. Some are believed to be good, some neutral, and some harmful. While I personally have never seen a jinn, there are people I know who claim they have. In these belief systems, when a jinn possesses a person, certain signs are considered typical. The person often displays unnatural physical strength, far beyond what their body should be capable of. They may develop an intense and abnormal hunger, eating huge quantities of food without gaining weight or showing signs of discomfort. They tend to withdraw socially, speaking very little and isolating themselves. At the same time, they may become extremely violent if provoked, sometimes to the point where family members are forced to restrain them using ropes or chains, much like what is shown in movies. Another commonly mentioned sign is a change in voice. The person may suddenly speak in a deeper or unfamiliar tone, sometimes sounding masculine even if the person is female. Females are believed to be more commonly affected, and the explanation given is often tied to beauty or vulnerability. In some cases, the possessed person may also become intensely religious, praying excessively or reacting strongly to religious texts, because the jinn itself is believed to have religious beliefs. My cousin began showing many of these signs. She became violent in ways that shocked everyone. She would lash out at her mother and other family members with a level of strength that didn't seem human. It would take several people to restrain her. She had to be physically held down at times just to prevent her from hurting herself or others. This alone was terrifying for the family, especially because this behavior was completely out of character for her. My father went to see her when things became unmanageable. His goal was not to immediately assume possession, but to understand what was happening. He spoke to her calmly and respectfully, asking her what she was feeling, whether something was bothering her, and if there was any reason for her behavior. He tried to approach it the way one would approach a distressed person, not an enemy. I don't know every detail of what she said, but from what I was told, she expressed a desire to be left alone. She wanted everyone to stop interfering and to let her go away. There was a strong resistance to any form of treatment or intervention. Throughout this period, she consistently wore green-colored clothes. In local belief, green is strongly associated with jinn, which only strengthened the family's suspicions. At one point, she spoke to my father in a deep, masculine voice. This was deeply unsettling, especially for those who knew her well. She tried to flatter him, telling him that he was the only one who was kind to her, the only one who understood her. Some believed this was an attempt to manipulate him into stopping further intervention, especially the idea of bringing in an exorcist. Eventually, despite her resistance, an exorcist was called. I do not know exactly what rituals were performed. These things are usually kept private and are not openly discussed, even within families. What I do know is that after the exorcist left, my cousin gradually returned to normal. The violent behavior stopped. Her voice returned to normal. Her personality seemed to settle back into what it had been before. From a scientific perspective, one could argue that this was a psychological episode that resolved due to suggestion, belief, or intense emotional intervention. From a cultural and religious perspective, many believe the jinn was expelled. I find myself caught between these interpretations. As a trained medical professional, I am aware of conditions like dissociative disorders, psychosis, and severe stress responses. At the same time, I struggle to fully explain how such a dramatic transformation happened so suddenly and resolved just as suddenly after the ritual. What makes this case particularly striking to me is that she was educated and mentally stable before this. There was no long history of mental illness. The shift was severe, abrupt, and terrifying. And then, after the exorcism, she returned to her previous self as if nothing had happened. I have heard many other stories as well. Stories involving black magic, objects buried under houses, the unexplained illnesses that resolved only after certain rituals were performed, and people seeing figures or shadows that disappeared when prayers were recited. Some of these stories come from close friends. Others come from friends of friends or relatives of acquaintances. While I maintain a skeptical mindset, I also recognize a pattern. These stories are too consistent, too culturally widespread, to be dismissed as pure coincidence. In India, the line between science and spirituality is often blurred. People may visit doctors and temples side by side. They may take medication while also seeking blessings. For many, these approaches are not mutually exclusive. They coexist. I don't claim to have answers. I don't expect everyone to believe these stories. I myself question them constantly. But I also believe that human experience is vast and not fully understood. There are gaps in our knowledge, areas where science has not yet provided clear explanations. I am sharing this story not to convince anyone, but to contribute to the conversation, to offer a glimpse into how these experiences are perceived and lived in another part of the world. If there is interest, I have many more stories I could share. Stories of black magic, other possessions, strange sightings, and unexplained events. Some are disturbing, some are subtle, some are deeply personal. These stories come from people I know, people I trust, and people who were genuinely changed by what they experienced. Whether one chooses to see them as supernatural events or psychological phenomena, they remain powerful, unsettling, and impossible to forget. My grandmother became involved with a wealthy and very well-known local attorney a few years after my grandfather passed away. Their story did not begin in a romantic place. It began in a large, crowded hospital in the middle of a busy city, the kind of hospital where the hallways never truly sleep and the air always smells faintly of disinfectant and coffee. At that time, my grandfather was fighting brain cancer. He had been in and out of the hospital for months, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. My grandmother was always there. She barely left his side. She sat beside his bed for hours, holding his hand, rubbing his back when the pain became too much, and leaning close to his ear to whisper things only the two of them shared. She spoke softly to him, telling him stories from their past, reminding him of moments from their life together, and sometimes just saying his name over and over so he would know she was there. The attorney noticed her during one of his routine walks through the hospital. He often visited hospitals, but not out of kindness. He was known for chasing medical negligence cases, always calculating which patients might turn into profitable lawsuits. He usually looked at people in hospital beds as potential clients, not as human beings with fear, love, and pain. That day, though, something stopped him. As he walked past one of the rooms, he saw my grandmother leaning over my grandfather, gently stroking his hair and back. There was something open and honest about the way she touched him, something deeply affectionate and unguarded. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was intense in its quiet devotion. Or she looked tired, worn down by worry, but there was a softness in her that drew his attention. The attorney felt something he did not expect. He was stirred by her warmth and her loyalty, by the way she showed love without embarrassment or restraint. It was something he realized he had never truly experienced in his own life. His marriage had been cold, distant, and practical. Other relationships he'd had were shallow and self-serving. Watching my grandmother with her husband awakened something unfamiliar in him. Later that day, he saw her sitting alone in the hospital cafeteria, holding a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. On impulse, he approached her. For the first time in his career, he did not think about legal angles or money. He simply introduced himself and asked if she was doing all right. She was polite but guarded. Her mind was consumed by her husband's illness, and she had little energy for strangers. Still, there was something gentle about the way the attorney spoke to her. He did not ask invasive questions. He did not push. He simply listened. Over time, he began to check in on her. Sometimes he brought her coffee. Sometimes he sat with her quietly while she waited for doctors. He learned my grandfather's name, his diagnosis, and how long they had been married. Slowly, A friendship formed. It was not romantic, at least not openly. My grandmother made it very clear that her heart belonged entirely to her husband. When my grandfather's condition worsened, the attorney continued to show up. He saw the exhaustion on my grandmother's face, the way she forced herself to stay strong. He admired her resilience and her loyalty even more. He never crossed a line. He knew she would not tolerate it, and in some way, that only deepened his respect for her. After my grandfather passed away, my grandmother was devastated. Years of caregiving ended in a quiet hospital room filled with grief. The attorney attended the funeral, standing at a respectful distance. In the months that followed, he checked on her often, but she kept him firmly at arm's length. She told him plainly that she would not be intimate with anyone for at least a year. She needed time to mourn, to heal, and to understand who she was without her husband. The attorney agreed, though waiting was not something he was used to. Still, he stayed. Eventually, after that year had passed, something shifted between them. Their conversations grew deeper. Laughter returned to my grandmother's life in small doses, or she allowed herself to feel companionship again. When they finally became romantically involved, it felt measured and intentional, not rushed or careless. Around that time, the attorney left his wife. The marriage had been empty long before my grandmother entered the picture, but her presence made it impossible for him to continue pretending. He chose to pursue a life with her instead. For a few years, they were together. From the outside, it looked glamorous. He was wealthy, generous, and powerful. He showered my grandmother with gifts. Jewelry boxes filled with expensive necklaces, bracelets, and rings. Trips, dinners, and attention followed. Many people assumed she was living a dream, but my grandmother was not blind. She knew his reputation. He had always been a playboy, charming and careless with women's hearts. At first, she believed she could live with that side of him. She told herself that she was strong enough, that she did not need exclusivity the way she once had. Over time, though, the truth became impossible to ignore. The gifts were not gestures of love. They were apologies. Each piece of jewelry came after a betrayal, a rumor, or a confirmed affair. The jewelry box grew heavier, but so did her heart. She realized that no amount of wealth could make up for a lack of loyalty. She had given too much of her life to compromise her values now. Eventually, she left him. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and final. Years later, long after their relationship had ended, something strange happened. One night, my grandmother was asleep in her bed when she suddenly woke up in a cold sweat. Her heart was racing, pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The room felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't explain. She had just had a dream. In the dream, the attorney was standing over her, hovering only a couple of inches from her face. He was staring directly at her, intensely, silently. There was no anger in his expression, only urgency and longing. She felt frozen, unable to move or speak. She glanced at the clock beside her bed when she woke up. It read 6:11 a.m. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was just a dream. Still shaken, she got ready for work and went about her morning. The feeling stayed with her, though, like a lingering echo. Later that day, she received news from her son. The attorney had died that morning. The time of death was recorded as 6:11 a.m. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. My grandmother believed deeply and without doubt that his last living thoughts had been of her. That somehow, in those final moments, his mind reached out to the person who had truly changed him, even if he had not been able to hold on to her in life. For her, the dream was not frightening anymore once she understood it. It felt like a quiet goodbye, an unspoken acknowledgement of something unfinished. What makes this even more haunting is that this was not the only time something like this happened in our family. Years later, I experienced something similar myself. I had a dream that felt unusually vivid and heavy with emotion. In the dream, my cousin was present, though nothing was said directly. There was simply a sense of loss, sadness, and finality that clung to me when I woke up. Not long after, I learned that my cousin had suffered a miscarriage around the same time I had the dream. I cannot explain these experiences logically, and I don't try to. I only know that both dreams carried information before the waking world did. They felt different from ordinary dreams, more deliberate, more meaningful. Whether these moments were coincidences, subconscious connections, or something beyond understanding, they left a lasting mark on us. They remind me that love, grief, and human connection do not always follow the rules we expect. Sometimes they reach us in silence, in sleep, and in moments when we least expect them.